One, and we're ready.
I had a complete mental spasm then. This is what happens, you see. One second. Marvellous. Right, so welcome back to another episode of the Manchester SEO podcast. This episode we have Cheryl McKay from Cahill Consulting. They do everything to do with business change and leadership and everything to do with that. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about Cahill Consulting and what you do. Yeah.
We're a small firm, and basically we support businesses with business change. We also do leadership, exec and business coaching through there. We've been operating about 14 years now.
Nice.
We're quite small, quite boutique, so I think what that gives us is that we can work quite closely with our clients and we're not a big outfit, so we're not looking for massive clients, but we're looking to really add value to sort of small, medium-sized businesses.
Yeah. The growing, ambitious kind.
Yeah.
So how did you, what's your background? How did you get into doing that kind of thing?
Weird background, maybe, way in. So I started my career in nursing. So I've got had three professional nursing qualifications. My first love, I guess, was sort of paediatric nursing. So I worked in hospital and community. And throughout that time, I guess, I was passionate about leading effective teamwork. And also, I was always that person that was looking at how can we improve how we were doing things. And led a lot of change in those roles as well. So I got to a point where I probably was a bit burnt out working on the front line. And I thought, what can I do and how can I do what is my passion, which is around leadership, leading change? How can I do more of that? So I took the leap and moved into managing or leading large-scale change programs, which was very different because where you manage staff, you were no longer managing staff. I was having to lead people from different organisations, people that weren't really invested in what we were doing. And I did that for about, 7-8 years, I think, within the NHS. I'd met my husband, moved to the Northwest, and I was always interested about developing myself. So I went and did a master's in business administration at Manchester Business School. Despite being one of probably the oldest, and there's very few females on our cohort as well. But loved it, got so much out of it. And I, as my sort of thesis really, I had this view that it didn't matter whether you sat in private businesses or whether you're in a public sector. I just thought everybody was equally as probably bad at delivering and affecting change in a sustainable and positive way that had lasting outcomes. So that was the subject of my thesis. So that gave me an opportunity to go into different businesses and chat to people and assess how their change programs were going, I guess, what the culture was like within those organisations. And then, I set up my own business and thought, well, I'll do this for myself. And the programme that I'd been working on was coming to an end anyway. So it seemed like a good time. And I've been doing that since.
I've been in lots of organisations where there's been some change-related projects or changing anything from software you're using through to different departments and being split up or redundancies or whatever like that. And it's amazing watching human behaviour and all the changes going on. No one likes change is the phrase, isn't it? And Depends what kind of change that is. Isn't
Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, we often usually think, oh, people are so resistant to change, and actually, life is about constant change. We're making changes in our lives every day. The difference between that and when it's you're working in a business or you're employed, is often those changes are more forced on you. So, and you know, basically as human beings, we like to have a sense of mastery and autonomy, and we need to feel that we've got a bit of control in some of that. And most of us like a bit of certainty. And if you remove those things, that's why sometimes people struggle with it.
Yeah.
So part of when you're trying to lead people through change is, how do we give that to people?
It's huge, that. I can give you an example. I was, the past company I was working for, we used to travel around, but there's consultants, group of consultants, we always used to travel around the world. And we'd make our own travel arrangements. And you could do that in a way where you would benefit from it. You could get commission from different places and, you know, cash back or whatever, collect points. And then they changed it so that it was done in one place, and it was a company-controlled thing. And I'd said to him, you know, well, what's the why? You know, a simple question, really, because everyone in the room was losing out probably a couple of grand a year, to be honest. And then and all I got was, well, this is big business. If you don't like it, you know what you can do. And I was a bit shocked by that. And but he kind of picked on the wrong person, because I was... and then a guy from the back of the room said, he'd heard the conversation, came over, he said, actually, I was in the room at the time. The worry is that you're all around the world, we don't know where you are. And if anything happens, then from a company care point of view, we need to know where you are. That made perfect sense. And at that point, I was like, that's all I wanted to hear. You know, just there must be a reason for it. You know, and how you communicate that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Most important thing. And I think sometimes as well, businesses, you know, they'll develop a strategy, or they'll start making changes and expect people to just roll with it. And I think it really is about sometimes sitting back and thinking, how do we engage people in part of this process? And if you look at some of the sort of people that are, you know, some of the top companies in the world that are really great at doing this stuff, you know, instead of, you know, they might need to downsize because, you know, they need to make some economies. But often what they might do is actually sit down with staff, say, this is what our problem is, and problem solve it with the team. Because sometimes through that you get really creative ideas about how you can do things differently. But people are bought into that process then. They kind of co-created and helped design actually what that future might look like. And it just gives that little bit of control.
Yeah. It's interesting, the human behaviour and how that affects. But you could make or break the company, couldn't it, for months and months and months.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
So, you know, what do you think are the main kind of challenges in those kind of situations for businesses, you know, when they're going through that kind of process? What are they doing?
For businesses, I think it's, one is sometimes they're kind of in the, you know, that sort of rock and that hard place. They need to make changes. And I think sometimes it's in that hard to do box. I think, again, sometimes some of the challenge is the team, having people on board with what it is that they're doing. I would say with a lot of people that I work with, I think that with leadership teams and business owners or business leaders, I think one is that sometimes some do feel that they need to have all the answers. And it's not that they may not have all the answers, but sometimes it's about opening up and letting others get involved in shaping some of that. I think capacity, time, I work with a lot of people that when they're trying to make changes, that actually they just don't have the time to really plan it and think it through properly.
It's because they're busy doing their own job, aren't they?
Yeah, and human behaviour and people. And quite often, we're very good at thinking, well, I've got a great project plan. I know what outcomes I'm trying to achieve. I know what I need to do with my clients, my customers, whatever that may be. But what we fail to think about is the softer side of affecting change. So it's actually, going back to your point, do people understand the purpose behind something? The reason that we're doing that? How are we engaging them? How are we, activating that sort of agency within somebody who wants to help, wants to contribute to that? And again, you don't have to do all of that on your own.
Yeah.
You can forge a team around you. I mean, quite often when I'm working with people, there might be somebody that has complete antibodies against me and doesn't necessarily want to get on board with that thing that you're trying to do, but actually there could be somebody else that they really respect, who's really credible to them, that actually if that person's part of your team, they can work with those people.
Yeah.
So you're really trying to get that Cotter talks about that coalition of the willing, but it really it's about how you engage people.
Yeah.
Show them what the problems are, help them overcome some of that collectively and together. But I think quite often as well, human behaviour being the way it is, that's sometimes the hardest bit. And I find with a lot of companies, people that I work with, they quite often know what the problem is. They probably know what some of the solutions are, but the challenge that they have is in that implementation. So how do we take that idea, that thing, and make it happen?
Yeah.
And some of that is then about the people.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Do you think that it's different in institutions like the NHS over like the private sector? Do you think that they change in terms of people's reactions to things?
My thesis would say no. Equally, focus on those things. Yeah. There is quite a lot of research that talks about when you're trying to implement something in service industries where there's lots of people. So you're not a very small team selling a product. You've got lots of people.
Yeah.
People create problems because we often, particularly in the NHS, for example, we often talk about the difference between it's the difference between putting a man on the moon is what we call a complicated change. But if you follow a series of steps in building that aircraft and doing the right things, more likely you'll get a positive outcome. When you're trying to implement something in an organisation that is reliant on people, it becomes a lot more complex because of people, behaviours, how we interpret things, how we receive information, how engaged people are. And it's sometimes in those businesses as well is things that you play with over one side can really adversely affect another side of the business. And so makes it all that more complex. So generally, again, when you're trying to implement changes in sort of service industries, what you need to do is you can't force it to happen. Again, going back to Daniel Pink talks a lot about this, about people needing that sense of mastery, being or having some autonomy. So what you need to do is help it happen. So you need to create the right environment, the right culture that enables some of that change. Can take a bit longer, for sure, but actually your results will be more sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jonathan mentioned a similar thing about complexity.
Did he?
Yeah. So you can tell like the healthcare background and experience and what's come from that, and it's a really interesting theory in terms of people getting away with things and make things more complex, and how egos get involved. And,
Egos, decision making, and just, relationships.
Yeah.
The jumping in point for me on any project work that I do with a client, whether I'm leading a change, is about building relationships, because if you don't have that, you've got nothing to step from. So it's almost that foundation. And some of that is understanding, a fancy word, we call it stakeholder management, or, and is understanding all those people in that ecosystem and actually what makes them tick, what are they interested in, what motivates them, what about the thing that you're trying to do is positive or negative for them, and thinking about actually how much power or influence do those people have over this thing that we're trying to do. And that just enables you to think, well, how do I work with the right people in a smart way? Because there's only one of you or a group of you. So, but some of that is about managing those complexities of human behaviour, and is about, there's nothing Machiavellian about it. It's about how we harness people and work collectively together to a common purpose, really. But interesting. And then what makes, I think, whether I'm doing leadership coaching, team coaching, whether I'm working with a business through change, it just makes that interesting because of that human dimension.
So when it comes to things like leadership coaching, what are the main things that you would look at when going working with someone in that way?
Yeah, it's again, whether I'm doing exec or leadership or business coaching, the first bit that you're trying to work through with that particular person is, well, what are their goals? And sometimes they're not clear, they don't really know, so sometimes it can take a bit of time to unpick that. And the thing is as a coach, is not having assumptions about what it is that they want to work on. So, for some business owners, it's having somebody who isn't in the business to give them that space where I can sit and listen, give them that space to think, ask them questions, help them reflect on maybe patterns, things that they're doing. So I was working with somebody recently who was talking about almost his plan to take, his strategic plan, what he wanted to take forward. And when we started to unpick some of that, reflecting on previous conversations, it was helping him realise that what he was saying was emulating something that he tried to move away from.
Right.
Sometimes it's helping people in those leadership positions to relate to their clients or actually their staff. And it's interesting. So I can work from somebody who's got marked imposter syndrome or a really loud inner critic that can be impacting them. So we might be thinking about strategies around how they overcome that and manage that on a daily basis so it doesn't create a problem for them, right through to some people are very business focused, and it is just talking through what it is they want to deliver and how they might go about doing that and holding that space. For some, it's relationships. And I have to say I spend a lot of time on relationships. Yeah. So helping them realise those differences between people, helping them think about how they develop more effective communication with those individuals. And that's where I'm an MBTI practitioner, so that's Myers-Briggs type indicator. It's a personality assessment tool. And some people love it, some people hate it. But what it does sometimes is give people insights into why we get energy and like something as opposed to why we avoid some things and why sometimes there are differences between ourselves and others. And it's sometimes those differences that can create a bit of a rub. So walking them through stuff like that, I spend a lot of time talking about the Cartman-Dreimer triangle and helping people see where they sit in that.
Okay.
And then it might be helping them think about some NLP techniques, about, again, thinking about how we communicate, how we take in information, and how we make decisions based on how we take in information. And sometimes when you help people think through some of that, it just changes how they have those interactions as well. So when I'm doing coaching, again, you're just really going where that person is. So it could be really listening. You might be, I sometimes share a lot of team frameworks where I might walk somebody through some really good team frameworks, and I'll walk them through what that means, and then I'll ask them to walk through it around their own team to think where those dynamics sit. And that really gives them then a bit of an action plan about what they need to take forward. But I guess the benefit of having a coach just means that, you've got somebody that gives you that space, might challenge your thinking a little bit, but also you're coming back to and will be saying, how did that go? And I've had clients sometimes that, one client that used to say to me, my board are hopeless, they're rubbish, they don't take any accountability. And he would rescue every time. And every session we started, he'd go, I've done it again, I'm rescuing still, aren't I? And you'd go, yeah. And then he would, and over a period of time, he really recognised that, and he started doing the work to change that.
A few years ago now, I was trying to remember while you were talking when it was, but I did a managers to leaders course, and it was at the business school, and it was revolutionary really. And the first thing that they went through was understanding yourself and that self-awareness of your strengths, the areas that you struggle with. Where do you get what's important to you from leaders good leaders in the past that you've had, bad leaders? Where do they come from? And then understanding yourself is really important, isn't it, in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's having that degree of, we talk about emotional intelligence, so it's being self-aware, but it's also being aware of actually what some of your triggers might be, and it's how you manage some of those triggers, how you manage those relationships. But yeah, self-awareness is so important. And there are things that, none of us are perfect. I was listening to something yesterday talking about pretty much most of us are pretty average. But there are all things that we can work on and we can develop. My husband would say to you, I'm an extremely disorganized person most of the time. I probably don't come across that way when I'm in work because I work on it.
Yes.
I'm not somebody that particularly loves detail. I'd lose energy, and if I have to sit down and go through management accounts and long research reports, it's the thing that I will put off and goes to the bottom of my to-do pile. But you have to do it. So it's about learning actually what is it I need to do to enable me to do that effectively. And that's part of being self-aware. And actually also knowing that, again, none of us are a complete package. And even if you are the CEO, business owner, is recognising the skills, attribute, characteristics of the people around you. Because you don't have to be the complete package. It's about actually surrounding yourself with a team that complement what you bring to that as well.
I remember saying to someone that I really like you because you are very good at this and this, and they kind of they smiled and they thought, oh right, okay. And I got more buy-in from them because they saw that I saw that in them, but also they go, oh yeah, I'm quite good at that. And it's amazing how this little things like that can make a difference.
Yeah. That feedback is really, really important. Both positive and negative. I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day. Actually, I can't remember who it was. I think it was the chap who was talking about AI, and I'm sure he talked about radical candor. And it's, again, coming back to sometimes giving feedback. Sometimes, we're very poor as human beings at giving good feedback quite often, that's direct, that people really resonates with people.
Yes.
And if we're giving bad feedback, we're probably often poorer at that still. So it's an interesting one. But people do need feedback, both positive and negative. Because the positive just reinforces those things and it gives recognition for something somebody's done well, even though some people can struggle to hear that. But giving direct feedback that maybe helps people grow and develop is important too.
My brother-in-law has a great phrase for it. Before he's about to be critical, he'll go, James, feedback's a gift. As soon as he says that, okay, hit me with it. what have I done? But it's really, it is a gift. 100%.
It is, but there is something. I can remember somebody giving me a piece of feedback years ago, and it was brutal, absolutely brutal. Now, talking about experiences, we probably all have experiences in life, whether that be personally or professionally, where we've maybe internalized something, and somebody gave me a piece of feedback years ago. Actually was probably one of the worst leaders I'd ever worked with, actually. But, on that particular day that they gave me this bit of brutal feedback, I'd just received news that a friend had had a heart attack. So one of the things, it's Kim Scott work around radical candor, is when you are giving people feedback, the first thing to do is say, I want to give you a piece of feedback. Is that okay? Because sometimes people are just not in that headspace. And again, we only see what is visible. I only see what's visible in front of me now with you, but I have no idea whether you've had a sleepless night, whether kids have been up all night, whether you've had a terrible start to the day, what's going on. So that just enables us to check in with people before we do some of that.
Yeah. It's interesting, that understanding of how the outside environment affects people in the workspace and understanding what they're doing. And I think sometimes, the people say, well, why should I go into work? Why should I go into the office? I think that's a big thing about going in, if you've got the option, is to go and meet people, talk about anything but work, when you're putting the kettle on or getting a drink or having lunch. Find out what they're doing outside of work, what's happening. There's a reason why they're being a little bit spiky at the moment, or other things that you just noticed. Obviously, we had Claire Owen in as well talking about.
I listened to her podcast.
Initiating, how to initiate conversations about how people are feeling.
And a great question, actually. I'd love to say I came up with it, but I didn't. But a great question to ask sometimes is, because sometimes we say to people, are you okay? And they go, oh, yeah. And they walk away. But actually sometimes saying to somebody, you don't seem yourself today. Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about it? And sometimes just by doing that helps that person reflect that maybe there's something that they're communicating in their body language or how they are. But really important, and so important for good team working, actually. I mean, I do, yes, I go into businesses and do business change, but I do a lot of one-to-one coaching, and I also do team development and team coaching.
Sure.
And I work when I'm working with teams, I might work with project teams that are just being established, or teams that have been brought together because teams have been merged or got bigger, expanded. But quite often you work with teams that look like they get on great. A lot of patting on the back, and there's lots of banter, and they really get on great. But actually, when you workshop it, and what I've usually heard from the client is actually they don't really deliver because there's no challenge. They don't hold each other accountable. They shy away from some of that feedback.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then conversely, I can work with teams that can have an awful lot of conflict. And Claire may have talked about some of this, but when you're working with people, it's about, and I'm sure to some extent, hybrid working, or certainly through the pandemic, that loss of people coming together and connecting. Because for people to say, going back to what you said there about I'm not feeling great, or I've got a problem, they're not going to share that if they don't trust you, or they think that's going to be held against them. And, there's a great book by somebody called Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The Advantage. And he talks about these dysfunctions that go in on teams. And that first one is that absence of trust. And if you don't have trust within a team, and it's not the sort of trust that says, well, I know James might arrive 5 minutes late every day for work, or he likes a coffee when he first walks in, or whatever that might be. But it's the sort of trust that says, I know that if I'm having an off day, or I'm not feeling it, or actually I'm dreading that conversation with that particular client later, or whatever, I can say that and somebody might do that for me. Or actually just sharing it and talking through it. And that's what Lencioni calls is that vulnerability-based trust, being vulnerable, but you have to have that kind of psychological safety with your team to do that. So, and that doesn't happen unless people come together. And it's a bit about having skin in the game with people, having, I know that, we've known each other for a while through BNI, but if you come together for a meeting and you don't really chat outside of that and know a bit more about what motivates you, what drives you, a bit about your family, what your interests are, then we don't notice those things. And you won't develop that trust with those individuals. And that is so important. And sometimes teams is all about, this is the business that we're there to do, and it doesn't afford much time to do any of that other stuff.
I know I've heard it from a few ex-sportsmen where someone's not performing right, and they'll take them away from it. Or if you've seen, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about the Chicago Bulls and The Last Dance. And Dennis Rodman was clearly, getting itchy feet, and they said, well, let him go away. Let him go away for a few days to Vegas, and then he'll come back, he'll be fine. That understanding that there's something else going on that's affecting, and you focus on the job. To lose something for a little bit of time, or to have that conversation, will get them focusing on what you want them to. Rather than just going, you're not working properly. Why are you doing this?
I find I read a lot, to be honest. I listen to a lot of podcasts as well, partly because I'm fascinated by people and I like to learn, and reading people's biographies, and I find sportsmen and women and coaching fascinating. I think, again, coaching is coaching. People are all human beings, regardless of what we're trying to coach them towards or through. So I think there's lots of crossover between that and probably leadership coaching. But really interesting, just getting to know people, their personalities.
I mean, sport's a huge thing, isn't it? And in terms of, we've seen it maybe in the women's cricket team in Australia over the winter, and how their performance has changed. You see it mentally in the men's game as well, where you struggle being away from your family and friends, or travelling or whatever. And that understanding of people. And often it's the best leaders that have that, isn't it? That intrinsic. I heard someone say about Brian Clough how he was more of a psychologist than he was a manager, and it obviously got results for him. Whether he knew he was or not, that's kind of what he did. But I've gone on a bit of a ramble there. Anyway.
Probably so have I.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we're here to hear your ramble. When I went to university, I did computer science, and I wasn't technical, or hadn't really thought about doing it until probably a month before my application, which is a different story. But because I was quite sporty and social, I was very different to most of the people on the course, and there was a big group, maybe 100 people, 100 kids, and they took us away to a place called Abu Dhabi, and it's outdoor, recreation place, and they did a lot of work on trying to build up their own confidence, looking at problem solving, and within that, teamwork, but also there was an analysis of what you'd be good at within a team and your role. And I found that really interesting. The Belbin test, I think it was called. And that was fascinating to see. And then instantly there was a kind of, there's an idea of understanding people's roles within the team. And everything seemed to work a little bit easier.
Yeah. I know Belbin quite well, but I use MBTI to help with that when we're thinking about team. And there are loads of other ones out there, DISC and Insights and all sorts. And, they all have their own flaws and strengths, I guess. But I think if you take it on a basis of it just helps you work out some of those differences that exist between us. And actually, often knowing those differences really helps change a conversation. But teams also, they need, the effective teams will know what their structure is, where they sit within a larger structure, where they sit within that broader ecosystem, whether that's, part of a company, part of a division, where they sit against competitors, whatever that may look like. But they also need to know what the company purpose and vision is, what that means for them, what their objectives are, what their role in is delivering that. There need to be effective systems and processes in place as well that help with some of that. And then a huge chunk is all about that interpersonal difference. And it's about, going back to Lencioni's work, there's, and I see this a lot because I sometimes work with boards who, again, it's sometimes around decision making, or actually I'm helping them think about how they are gelling as a new board leadership team, what their strategy, vision, purpose is, but also sometimes we might work on their values as well. And sometimes there's a bit of team development work in there as well. There is a difference between team development and team coaching. I can explain in a minute, but within that, there's that thing about, I said if there isn't trust, Lencioni talks about teams need to be able to have what we call productive conflict. What we mean by that is being able to challenge each other. Because what you don't want is a board that all sit around a table going, not saying a word, walking out the door and having no intention of following up on any actions. So you need to air the thing around the table. So that's giving people permission to speak their mind. Now they need to do it in a sensitive, authentic, be authentic, but they need to be sensitive. They need to be sensitive to other, and they need to be compassionate with that. It's not about screaming at somebody. And only when you've been able to do that will you then get sort of agreement. And I've worked with boards and I've had people that have been real abstainers to decisions that were being discussed, and we've given them the chance to really explore that and share that opinion. And through doing that, you can say, okay, but if we go back to the principle of why this is being discussed, actually, can you all concur that that is the right course of action to take, bearing in mind you're worried about this particular thing or this risk? Because, again, it comes to the implementation. Sometimes I work with businesses where they're working on something, it's not yielding any outcome. They're just spending a lot of time and energy and resource on doing something, and it's not having the desired impact. So stop it. But what you need is the right checks and balances in place to be able to make that assessment. And quite often, we don't always know what outcomes we're looking at. We don't always know or understand the process that we're following that might achieve some of that. Whereas if you do, and you can study that a little bit, what means is, instead of stopping something, throwing it out, I often say don't throw the baby out the bathwater unless you've really assessed, are there some tweaks we can make that mean that we get that thing back on track. So when you get agreement, it's not that we're going to agree and move on and carry on regardless, because business is ever changing, isn't it? In your business, it's ever changing. You're not going to carry on plugging away doing something if it's people don't want to buy it, or actually there's something that's coming around the corner that could overtake it. So it's being able to stop and recognise that, and then bring back those things back to a team to say, I know we took that decision, but we need to, change course a little bit. And then there's the next bit that Lencioni talks about, is we need to hold each other accountable. And that's for things that we're doing and not doing. And that's where some teams really struggle. So it's in that productive conflict where they feign agreement and walk away and have no intention. But there's then, how do you give that direct feedback that says, you're down to deliver this by this particular date. It hasn't happened. This is causing a problem. Let's talk about it. What's happening? And again, it's doing that in a sensitive way, because sometimes we can, going back to what people like and where their strengths are, we may have given somebody a task or a job to do that is unrealistic because A, they don't have the time or capacity, or it's not in their wheelhouse. It's not something that they like. Quite often when I've coached people, they'll say, I feel like a square peg stuck in a round hole because I'm in this job and everything I have to do is stuff that doesn't bring me any joy.
Yeah. You find that with more senior lawyers. So they'll still have targets made for bringing in money, but actually the whole time and day spent up with managing things, and maybe it's managing complaints, or it's missed court dates, or there's too much work come in and not enough people to do it, and then you get those kind of issues, and then I've got 120 cases, and some are high value and really important, but I haven't looked at them in 3 months. It's and so you have that kind of unrealistic. It's more probably an old system competing with the new ideas of what business should look like in a probably a more traditional way of working, which is law firms, accountancies, and all that kind of thing. And I'm not sure I brought that up, but you know what I mean? There's so much that goes into delivery and why, and especially in my industry, where delivery changes all the time. And for me, I don't want someone who just does the same thing every day. And with the same client they did 6 months ago, because it probably won't work. But if they do come to me and go, have you seen this? Have you heard about that? Have you read that? I reckon this makes sense. I reckon we should try it on this client because of this, and this. And let's test it out, you know. And it's important for me in my business and what we do to be like that. Yeah.
I think it's probably important for any business is to, you know, not stand still. You know, technology, the economy globally, things are changing and evolving all the time, massively. They are in health, they are in any business sector. And, you know, I'm always fascinated, again, probably through having done an MBA, but quite often reading about what goes wrong in companies. And just why some companies don't succeed. And sometimes it's because they're very stuck, they're not adaptable, they're not flexible, they're not agile. And you have to be these days. And it really doesn't matter, I don't think, what sector you're in. You have to be. Even for people in what I do, because the world is changing.
How teams work changes as well.
Yeah.
If people are all remote, it's different.
Years ago, I used to do all my coaching face-to-face, which actually, with hindsight, given some of my clients are in London and Yorkshire, I used to be slomping on that train to go and see somebody. Now, you know, your office is wherever you happen to be, so on a train you do loads of work. But these days, most of my coaching is done virtually.
Right.
Which in some ways can work really well for clients, because actually, do you know what? I can be flexible when I offer that. So it means for some clients they can do it in their own time rather than during work time. Or it means they can be at home so that they absolutely know that they've got a confidential space before they go into the office. And again, you know, some of the stuff I do with teams is virtually. And then during the pandemic, I was working with a business for a couple of years. I never set foot in that business. I did all of the work remotely. So amazing. And actually, bizarrely, when I did finally go up and I was running a face-to-face workshop with them, where you kind of just wanted to go around hugging everybody because it was...
well, you know them, but you've never met them,
Absolutely. And the biggest thing was, oh my God, you're so much taller than I thought you were. Because you just see people in that box, don't you?
Yeah.
So, you have to move with the times, and including, you know, I deliver some leadership training, but usually it's pretty bespoke to what a client's problem is, or what it is they're trying to work through. And it might be on tools and techniques about implementing change. It might be around actually how do we influence change? Because we can't make it happen, we've got to help it happen. So, you know, we talk a lot about leaders learning to storytell. So, you know, Simon Sinek talks a lot about why and purpose. But, and I often say it's about letting people in behind the curtain a little bit about what drives you, what motivates you. And I often, sometimes when I'm working with a group that I think, oh, this could be a bit challenging because I'm going to get a lot of pushback, I'll use storytelling. So I might stand in front of the room and share a story that makes me feel sometimes a little bit vulnerable, connects with sometimes the purpose of why I'm there. And it's amazing how it just unlocks people's thinking.
Yeah.
Because when we tell stories, it connects with emotions. And so some of the training I might be delivering is sometimes around some of that softer stuff.
It was some. I read something about how they used to train people, spies in the war, and how a lot of getting information out of people was sharing some information with them.
Yeah.
People will mirror and reciprocate, and it's interesting how it can work in business.
Yeah.
As well.
There are, I mean, I said I like reading, and and if you spoke to my husband, he'd probably say my biggest spend in the house is on books. But I am an avid reader because I'm always trying to learn new things and develop, and whether that's working with people that I'm working with on an individual team base to understand a lot more about how people think and how you can really help transform people. Not I can't transform them, but how you help them unlock that thinking. But some of the best books I've written were written by hostage negotiators, and two books that had a massive impact on me. One was by a chap called George Colreeser, I think his name is, but he talks about, and again, it's that thing about when you're working with teams, and I was listening to a podcast where they talked about it a bit, and it happens in relationships, that bit about giving feedback. If somebody's annoyed you, irritated you, done something, and we don't air it, and we think, just bury it, it'll be okay. And I see this in B&I rooms, I see it in life, you see it in families. But what happens is that thing doesn't go away. Over time, it just gets bigger and bigger, and then it blows. And sometimes it can, if it's in a team, it can infect the whole team sometimes and dynamic. And so George talks about, you need to put the fish on the table, because if you leave a fish under a table, and I love it as a metaphor, but if you leave a fish under a table, ignore it, over time it's going to stink that room out. and so airing stuff like that. But, and so even that learning that you can get from people from other businesses, other industries, fundamentally, they're all working with people and human beings, and it's fascinating. And Adam talks very much about when you're trying to get people to solve tough problems, you have to be really present and actively listen to what people are saying and not saying. And going back to what I was saying about people not agreeing around a meeting table, listen to what it is that we're saying, because our own thinking, you can get groupthink. People can all, a great tool I sometimes use with teams is De Bono's 6 thinking hats, because, some of us can be what we call black hat or white hat thinkers. So, we like data, or we can be quite pessimistic and always see the worst thing that can happen. Whereas, some of us are, we like new things. We're quite optimistic. We like being creative. So sometimes listening to those people that actually have a different view and really listening to understand can help shift people's thinking. And that's around a board table, whether you're working with a team, whether you're trying to help a business through change, it all matters.
I had Pete Ackley in. He's big on culture. Have you worked on culture with many teams? And I suppose that's what we're talking about, isn't it? That ability to, the culture in the team is, do they have everything they require to be successful? And then, how do we communicate that? How do we communicate together? What are the behaviours then that are repeatable, that give us the results?
Yeah, really, really, really important. So there's something on me about having that dialogue with that individual that doesn't name names, because it's about protecting the safety of the group that I'm working with. And I've worked with people that fundamentally, I've worked with a few leaders that were probably toxic, but I've worked with more leaders who were quite visionary and brilliant, but maybe just how they executed something wasn't quite there, and it impacted on the culture. And there it's how do you help them see that and help them make some of those changes that will have a positive impact. And it's going back to how I said I love reading from different industries. There's a guy I stumbled on, and can't remember how I stumbled on him actually. I think I was listening. There's loads of great podcasts out there, including your own. But
There are lots of great.
I think it was a high performance podcast series, which I love. And there was a guy on there called Will Guidera. Well, fell in love with him anyway for several reasons. One is he's a restaurateur, and he took what was one of the worst performing restaurants in the world to being the top restaurant in the world.
Right.
Or certainly the worst in that sort of high-end category. If you ever watched a series called The Bear, which is set in Chicago, about a guy that, I forget the guy's name, but he was the guy that was in the American... the series will come back to me in a minute. But anyway, Jeremy something White.
Okay.
Plays the guy in The Bear. Anyway, so Will Guidera is also one of the, advisors on that to make sure it was authentic to how restaurants work. But he's written lots of books about how he created this amazing restaurant. And really fascinating read. And if you haven't got time to read the book, I would recommend listening to the podcast because he's a very interesting man. But I loved what he said. He said, you can't teach culture. Culture, it's like catching a cold, and people should have to kind of catch on. It has to happen over time. And a lot of that is about what are the leadership behaviours that we are modelling. And I always find it fascinating when... it struck me the other day, I was going somewhere and I went to a golf club and you still have, this is their spot and their spot. And quite often when all the senior team have their own little spots in the car park. But there's something about actually how are we modelling the behaviours of others that we want to see in our business. Yeah. And if you're somebody that isn't... on a softer scale, if you're a business owner that says to me, I don't think I'll have a holiday in the next 5 years and I need to be here all the time and I'm sending emails out at 10 o'clock at night, what message are you giving to your team, to your staff? Yeah. If you're somebody that is shouting at people 1 minute, nice the next, what are you modelling to your staff? So if you are demonstrating the right leadership behaviours, demonstrating your vision, your values to your team consistently, they will catch on to that. Yeah. And actually, if they don't, then are they the right people in there? And I kind of like that. I mean, you said about sports. Some sports teams won't go for the shiny, amazing player because he won't work with the team. He won't embrace the vision and values of what that team are there to do. It's...
Yeah, I mean, I've had the situation where I'm looking at someone in the business where you're like, and I was asking someone for some advice and they said, well, what are your values in the business? And so I told him ones that I felt were important. He said, does he represent that? And I was like, well, not really.
No.
I said, well, you need to do what you need to do.
Yeah,
and
red flag.
Really interesting. And then lots of stresses and things that I didn't need to deal with were were dealt with and
Yeah.
that weren't part anymore. And
Yeah.
just a very simple thing to go,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I, as I said, I do listen to some of your podcasts, and I was listening to the one with Claire from HR Made Easy.
Yeah.
And what Claire was talking about, again, in terms of recruitment, is recruiting people that will embrace the values of your business, of your company, but also not, sometimes we think, oh, that person's got all the exact right skills that we need. And you see this as well, people being employed because they fit some psychometric test that says they need. But actually having somebody that is going to work well with that team, and they might not have exactly the right skills and experience, but if they've got the right behaviours, the right attitude, the right characteristics to fit in, you can teach the other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think businesses need to do more of that. And again, Will talks about, how, again, his way of recruitment is, I can't remember how he says it, but it's something like, I'll probably get it wrong, but it's something about recruit slowly, fire quickly.
Right.
Yeah, basically. Don't hold on to those people forever and ever. And again, working with teams that have had lots of problems. They've maybe had one personality in that team that has created lots and lots of problems that nobody's given that person any direct feedback. And as a result, they've had a real problem retaining staff. And, in a lot of businesses, it's hard to recruit the right people. So why hang on to somebody? Yeah, they might be technically great, but if it means that you've got a massive turnover, actually, why are you hanging on to them?
I won't mention names, but I was listening to another podcast, and there was an actor on there, a famous actor, and he's well known for his bravado, and if someone's in trouble, he'll just go and beat someone up. He's that kind of guy, He'll punch someone, and more often than not, trouble found him as well.
Yeah.
And
you have to tell me after.
Yeah.
Fascinating to know.
And there's one of his friends, it might have been his wife, female, said, and she put it really well. She said, I know you feel like you're protecting me and Pete, your friends around, but it actually makes me dread going out with you anywhere for meetings or food or anything. And I would prefer you to handle things differently. And it was a big eye-opener for him in his behaviour. Something that he thought was a good thing actually was making people think badly of him. And it's interesting, that feedback and the way it was delivered was amazing.
But sometimes it's feedback that people don't give us. And, going back to what you said about self-awareness, the reason that you might do 360-degree feedback on people and you get feedback from others is because there will be things about ourselves, however self-aware, that we don't realise that we've got those tics or we're doing that thing that has an impact on somebody. And it might not impact on everybody. For 80% of the people that you might encounter, it might not bother them. But for some people, it may really trigger them. And without that knowledge, how can we make those changes? And it's quite often we talk about with human beings is, again, when I'm thinking about communication and how people engage or don't relate to each other, is, in NLP terms, we often talk about we all have our own individual maps of the world. And our maps of the world are constructed through, we take in information, it goes through our senses, we process that information, and then basically we have our own version of what that reality is. And that reality will be different for everybody. So, maps, again, if we're thinking about maps of the world, there's a lot of information in there, but there's a lot of information that will be missing. And so when you're interacting with people, it's always to remember that actually I'm basing my perception of something based on my own map of the world, my own version of reality. And that doesn't mean that's yours. Because how we take in information, our previous experiences related to those situations can really vary greatly. And again, it's that bit we talked about earlier. We don't know what's going on underneath, whether somebody's had a bad day, whether they've slept well, whether they've not feeling great, whether something that we've said has triggered some event from the past. So we have to be mindful of that when we're interacting with people.
One of the problems, and it's such an important thing, is that you don't say something because you're scared of offending or causing confrontation that you don't. I don't like confrontation. Do you have any tips for how people can approach it in a better way?
To give feedback.
Yeah, for giving feedback in a good way.
Yeah. So the first thing, I would say look up Radical Candor model. It is brilliant. And it talks about how we can give better feedback. So the first one is, I would say, is be self-aware. So what mindset are you in before you give that feedback? Because if you're emotionally charged or something's really bothering you, that's probably not the best time to do it. Then what you need to do is think about, how do I give that feedback in a way that's kind and compassionate, but actually that person's going to receive that. So you need to ask that person, actually, if they're prepared, is it okay to give them a bit of feedback? And I often say, it might feel a bit uncomfortable hearing this, but I feel I need to share that with you. And then the next bit is about be direct. Don't preamble. Don't waffle around the houses.
Yeah.
You might say this comes in the spirit of, I just want to share this. And it's about using the I word because it's your perception. It may not even be within their reality. They may not even be aware of it being a problem. So if you say something like, I saw this happen, it made me uncomfortable. So you are owning. It's a bit like with children. You don't say you're a bad child. You label the behaviour that you're seeing. But be direct. And say this thing is causing X or whatever. Say, I know you care about people, and you may not know that that's upset somebody. But always ask for people for, feedback after as well, and leave that door open and help them think about what they might want to do. And some people don't always receive. Some people will either go, oh my God, I didn't realise in the moment. Some people might get a bit upset, a bit angry, but you need people to give them that space to go away and reflect on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say probably most people that I work with don't give feedback well. And you'll get some that are very brutal and very direct, but forget there's a person in there. But most of us, what we do is we talk around the houses a lot. And my husband says I do this a lot. I give the woman's own version of events rather than the Sun headlines around what it is. He says I do that a lot, so that's something I have to work on.
Must be some interesting conversations in your household.
And we try and practice radical candor with each other as well. But those approaches, people are people, whether you're in work or at home. Yeah. So, again, having those conversations with family members. And quite often when I'm coaching, I'll say to people, try it out with a family member or somebody first if you're worried about doing it with that person. Yeah. And if you think, if you're really nervous of giving that feedback to somebody, practice it in front of a mirror. And I would say it's, when you're giving the feedback to somebody that's difficult, say to somebody, this, I feel uncomfortable giving it, and it might be uncomfortable to hear, but I feel I need to say it.
Someone gave me advice. He said, I've got to have a conversation I don't want to have, or something like that, I feel awkward having it. Is that all right,
Yeah. But that's being direct, and it's asking your permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was, I wish I used it, it went well.
Yeah.
I was very thankful for that.
Yeah.
A little bit of how to phrase things in a way that...
And that's why sometimes practicing it on your own and thinking, don't just go into it. It's, if you're doing a sales pitch, or you're presenting, or you're going in front of a big client, you don't just, well, some people probably wing it, but most of us go away and think about what it is we want to say, or what points we want to get across. It's no different to feedback. And actually, if you think about the consequences of getting it wrong is either you've moved into the block, well, Kim calls it ruinous empathy, where actually we've given the woman's own version, or we don't tackle it, or we end up talking about something different, the weather or whatever. Or actually we've been too brutal, and actually a bit too blunt, and we've not thought about the person that we can cause harm. So you need to think about how you want to phrase it. You need to say it. And I think too often we let, somebody, because it's hard to do, or we avoid it. I think we sometimes have people that then create a toxic culture within teams, businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to give any advice to a leader in a business, or a business owner that knows there's a problem in their team somewhere, it's causing an issue with delivery to clients and whatever, what would you say to them? Where's a good place to start, I suppose,
I think be open-minded, ask questions, and actually listen. Something I need to work on all the time is listening. I'm not, despite being a coach, I'm not always a great listener. But that's something I work on. But actually, as somebody said to me, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So ask good questions and really listen. And, tackling it. So one is trying to get to some of the root cause of the problem. And if they don't feel they can do that on their own, is ask for help. People like me, people that can work with them and the team.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people that do team coaching and team development, we use a lot of sort of diagnostic tools, which mean that we can send links out to individual team members to try and find out some of the challenges that are going on with the team. So that can sometimes help surface some of that.
Yeah.
But, people will only share if you've got that culture within a business that they feel safe to do so.
Yeah.
But you can't, going back to the analogy of the fish under the table, you can't leave it, because it will you'll find that people start leaving. Yeah. And if they don't leave, what you'll find is productivity is being impacted. And, businesses can't afford that. We need, a bit like, a rugby or football team are only as good as them working together. It's the same with any team in any business. They need to work together to be productive.
Yeah. Fascinating. What are the kind of main challenges coming up in the business world for people, do you think, at the moment?
Oh, God.
I mean, this is really... so maybe I should be more specific to help you with this one. There's issues... A big challenger to the status quo at the moment is our AI, isn't it? And how that's affecting how people work in teams, how they, how businesses achieve what they're trying to achieve. Have you come across that at all with working with in businesses and with change and like that at the moment?
With AI, not so much. I think that different businesses are approaching it and embracing it in different ways. But again, I would say with any business, when you're bringing in something new, it will create waves because there will be that degree of uncertainty. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my role? Will I still have one? Will they still need me? Even if you bring in workforce changes, where you're bringing in new personnel, it will create waves. So all of those things will be unsettling for people unless they understand the purpose of what that means for them. But for sure, that will impact on how people need to work. And it's like with any technology. Most businesses are embracing technology in different ways. In healthcare, for example, more and more people do, during COVID, they went from doing face-to-face consultations to a lot of it being done remotely. That was a massive challenge for people. Quite a lot has gone back and reverted back to how it was. But again, going back to COVID, massive impact on, it's changed for so many businesses how they operate. In terms of having, some have gone back. Everybody's back in the building. But again, there's a lot more hybrid working as well. And again, going back to that sense of team and people having skin in the game, when you've got people that are working remotely, how do you bring them together in a meaningful way? There's no point in people coming into a building to be sat in rooms on Teams all day talking to other people where they're not connecting, because they could have done that at home where they didn't have a 2-hour commute or whatever. So when they're coming together, what's the purpose of coming together? So if they're coming together, so actually they're doing things as a team, whether it be, one of the things I talk a lot to, it doesn't matter whether you're a leader, an exec, a business owner, is creating capacity in your week, whenever that works for you, but just to take stock and reflect, reprioritise, see what's worked well that week, what hasn't worked as well, what you could improve on, things that you need to notice. So, again, do stuff like that with your team. So I think, that has shaped how we do things. But you still have some people that are very much, I need to see you there to know you're productive. Well, actually, isn't it about us being more outcomes focused on what we expect of people and enabling them and trusting them to do the job? And again, if you know that individual, you'll know how much support you might need to give or how much supervision you might need to give. You might need to offer more check-ins or whatever that might be.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've worked remotely a lot, home a lot, and had the choice. And then our business is all remote at the moment. And I there's an ex-basketball player called John Amici from Manchester. Heard of him. He talked a lot about this, and he said it resonated a lot. Where he said, don't force people to go in. There's no point in adding extra stuff to the day, but you have to give them a reason. And then it's that joy of going in. What do we get here that we don't get from anywhere else? And why is it important? And it might be the chat next to the water cooler or the, the progress you make as a team or get to see people face to face. Stuff like that.
Yeah, but also you can have people that are working in a building, behind closed doors because they're in offices or behind, open plan offices often have that unit, don't they, around them to give a bit of protection and privacy. But we don't come together in a communal area and have lunch or chat to people or check in with people.
Yeah.
And again, I've worked with teams where doing some of that work that helps people recognise things that they do. Somebody once said to me, he had this eureka moment, and he said, "Oh my God, I do that all the time. How must I be making that person feel?" And again, with that team, I was doing MBTI and some one-to-one coaching sessions. So when we came together face to face, somebody else came up to me in the room and said, "I just need to give you this feedback." So-and-so came up to me and said, apologise for how they'd been responding to me over years.
Yeah.
And she said, "I can't tell you how much that meant, and they're really making an effort to change their behaviour and not do that."
Wow.
Now, that same individual in that workshop, because quite often when you are doing a workshop, you really spend a lot of time trying to build some safe psychological safety in the room so people will share, and you ease them into that slowly. But that same individual stood there, and he was a gentleman, stood there in front of 15 colleagues and said, "I'm really suffering with my mental health at the moment, and I've not shared that with anybody, and I need your help."
Yeah.
And it, again, it's, you don't need somebody like me to come in and do that. But again, within your business or your team, it's creating those opportunities to have that discussion. Because without it, how do we know what people are going through and how do we support them?
Yeah. Especially if they're working from home all the time. All that. Wow. I feel like we could talk for days. It's been a real pleasure to have you in and hear a bit more about what you do.
I could talk for hours. I probably could.
Yeah. It's been fascinating, and thank you very much for coming in and
Thank you.
being part of it.
Well, thank you for inviting me along.
I knew you'd be good.